Thanks for having us in your office. Very splendid office it is too. Let's get straight into it. Now, the OBR have halved their predictions for growth for the forthcoming year. That means that you're failing in your central mission, doesn't it?
Well, the OBR, reflecting some of the challenges faced by countries around the world, have revised down growth this year. But of course, they've also revised growth up in every other year in this decade. And they say that by the end of this Parliament, the economy will be bigger than they previously thought, and indeed bigger than they predicted when the Conservatives left office last summer.
But GDP per capita, which is probably the most important figure, that continues to decline right up until 2029.
Well, actually, the OBR say that in this Parliament, GDP per capita will increase by 5.6%, whereas in the last Parliament, GDP per capita fell. Probably the most important thing in terms of money in your pocket is real household disposable income. And the OBR have revised that up, and they're now saying that by the end of the Parliament, the average person will be £500 better off than they forecast when we came into office.
Do you think, given so many bills are going to increase this April, council tax, TV licences, all sorts of other things, that people are going to really feel the benefit of that?
That takes into account inflation and rises in bills. It's real household disposable income per person. But look, I absolutely recognise that the cost of living crisis continues to bite, that those increases in prices over the last few years, and indeed for many people, particularly the increase in mortgage costs and the increases in rents, means that people are not feeling better off. I think during the course of this Parliament, we've already seen the last few months wages rising at a faster rate, actually twice the rate of inflation. And as that continues, as we hope it will, people will start to feel that benefit. But I won't underestimate how damaging the cost of living crisis has been the last few years in eroding family incomes.
When you were in opposition, you accused George Osborne of making a political choice for austerity. Now, you're accused of making that choice yourself, particularly in the last week, introducing the 5 billion welfare cuts, although the OBR has slightly questioned those figures today. Why have you made that choice? Because you could have made other choices.
So real spending in the economy by the government increases in every year of this Parliament. In the budget last year, I put £190 billion into what we call day-to-day spending to keep public services running. And I also put an additional £100 billion into capital spending. Now, in the spring statement today, I've reduced a little bit the growth rate of public spending. So it will grow at 1.2% a year on average above inflation through this Parliament. It was 1.3% that I set out in the autumn. But let me just say this as well, that capital spending on transport, on energy, on housing, on school and hospital buildings, actually we've revised that up because we recognise we do need to fix the sort of physical infrastructure of our public services, not just the running costs.
I get that, but tell that to the 3.2 million families who, according to the OBR, are being penalised. Explain that to the 250,000 people who are going to be pushed into poverty because of these reforms. That's not something people expect a Labour government to do.
Well, look, the numbers in that impact assessment about the welfare reform are based on no changes in terms of people going back to work. But the whole point of the welfare reforms that we're making is about giving targeted, personal, guaranteed support to people who are on sickness and disability benefits to help them to fulfil their potential and find work that is appropriate for them so that they're not going to be getting less money, but they will actually benefit from employment.
Will be getting less money, about £4,500 on average. I mean, that's a massive figure for a lot of people.
I mean, the majority of people who are on personal independence payments will continue to get them, and they'll continue to go up in line with inflation. But we are tightening up the gateway to get onto personal independence payments. At the moment, 1,000 people a day are going on to personal independence payments. That is simply not sustainable. And we've got a situation today where 1 in 8 young people are not in education, employment or training. I'm not willing to write off a generation of young people in that way. I don't want them on sickness and disability benefits. I want them in work.
But you know as well as I do that all governments make choices. You didn't have to make these cuts. You didn't have to cut the winter fuel allowance. You could have made other choices. You could have, for for example, taxed people with £10 million of assets 2%. That would have brought in billions of pounds a year, yet you chose to penalise poorer people.
Well, in the budget last year, we raised taxes to the tune of £40 billion. That was primarily on the wealthiest and also asking businesses to pay more through national insurance. But we got rid of the non-dom status. So if you make your home in Britain, you'll pay your taxes here. Put VAT on private schools.
Well, that's backfired, hasn't it?
What has?
But VAT on private schools, that's actually costing you money, according to the BBC today.
Oh, no. The Office for Budget Responsibility and the Institute of Fiscal Studies say that it's bringing in more money than they originally anticipated. So those changes, increasing capital gains tax and tightening up the inheritance tax rules, do mean that the wealthiest are paying more into the tax system. And we're using that money to invest in the National Health Service, more than £20 billion into the NHS. And as a result, NHS waiting lists have now come down for 5 months in a row.
Do you deny that 3.2 million people are going to be worse off by your welfare changes and that 250,000 people are being pushed into poverty?
I don't think that is what will happen, because I know...
Well, that's what the OBR say.
Well, what the OBR say is they're not, at this stage, making any allowance that people are likely to go into work. But we've put aside £1 billion for personalised, guaranteed training. I was in the job centre in my own constituency in Pudsey last week.
Well, you've lost your job.
I was meeting with the work coaches there, and they were telling me extraordinary stories about people that they've helped back into work, people who others might write off, but they were supporting. But they said to me, we need to scale this up because there's a lot more support we could be giving. Okay. So we don't want to write people off. We want to help people get into appropriate work so they can earn more money.
You've got a real job to convince people who are disabled that you are on their side. You've also got a job to convince some of your colleagues. Clive Lewis, your Labour MP colleague, he told our political correspondent, Ali Schomburg, today, and I quote, Rachel Reeves is balancing the budget on people's broken backs. I mean, that's a pretty strong thing for one of your colleagues to accuse you of doing.
Well, I don't accept that characterisation. The basic principles that I operate in is that people who need support should get it, that people who can work should work, and that we need a welfare system that is sustainable so that it's there for future generations when they need it. That's what the reforms that we are putting in place will do. I don't want to write people off, whether they are young people who had a difficult time during the pandemic, whether they are older people who have been made redundant, whether they're people who fell out of work with ill health and now are stuck on benefits. I want to support those people, get back into meaningful employment, and that's what our reforms will do.
There was a protest in Swansea this afternoon against cuts in benefit payments for disabled people. This is what one of them told LBC's reporter. All these proposals will do is take away the support we need and make it harder for us to keep our jobs. Disability benefits, they're not a handout. Workers have paid them through national insurance. The fact that a so-called Labour government could do this should really spark a debate about political representation. These are people that feel completely let down by you as a Labour Chancellor.
Well, what I would say to people who are concerned, that look at the detail of what we're setting out. £1 billion of support, an unprecedented amount of support to help people back into the workplace. I don't think anyone believes that the welfare state is working well today. It's not working well for people who are sick and disabled. It's not working well for young people who are trapped out of employment. And it's not working for taxpayers because we're paying more and more in tax to support a system that's not actually helping those who need it most.
But as I said, if a Tory Chancellor had made a lot of these announcements, you would have been the first to denounce them in previous incarnations. And people, I think a lot of people, I get callers into my programme saying, I don't recognise this as a Labour government. They think that you're effectively a sort of Tory Chancellor in fiscal drag.
Well, we've reduced NHS waiting lists for 5 months in a row now. Since we came into office under 9 months ago, there have been 2 million additional appointments in the NHS. We're rolling out free breakfast clubs at primary schools from April this year. And next week, people on the national living wage will get a pay rise worth £1,400 if you work full-time on the national living wage. We're building more homes. We've got a commitment to build 1.5 million homes in this parliament. So more families, more young people can get on the housing ladder, but also putting money into social and affordable homes so that people who can't afford to buy a home of their own can still have the security that comes from a home of your own.
But if growth is your number one target, you made that very clear in the general election, You've introduced a lot of policies which people think of basically anti-growth. The national insurance hike, for example, that is going to cost a lot of jobs. Unemployment is going to go up as a result of it. You must have lots of businesses lobbying you on this. I get calls on my show all the time, particularly from small businesses who say, look, we can't continue with this. I mean, is that something now, in hindsight, that you wish you hadn't done?
We had to secure the public finances. They were in a mess when I became Chancellor. I don't think that will be a surprise to any of your listeners. That's why they booted the Conservatives out, because they had mismanaged the economy and public finances weren't properly funded. So when we've asked the wealthy and businesses to pay more in tax, they can be confident that that money is going to reduce NHS waiting lists, which is absolutely essential if we're going to get more people into work. We need an NHS that's working. But I guess some of these questions, what they reveal...
the NHS who will lose their jobs because of the NHS. Because of the NIC hike. I mean, one of my listeners sent me a tweet today saying, could you put this to Rachel Reeves? What does it say about your government that it will be easier to end your own life, but more expensive to employ people in hospices? I mean, it's a stark contrast, but you can see how he can make it.
Well, because of the national insurance contribution increases, we've been able to put around £25 billion into the NHS, including one of the biggest ever settlements for hospices. And we're only able to do that because we are asking businesses to pay more in national insurance. But I'll just say this, the questions that we've sort of been through in this interview show the balancing act, I guess, that any government, including this government, has to make. Because on the one hand, there's criticisms that we are taxing too much. And on the other hand, there's criticisms that we're not spending enough. But in the end, you've got to make sure that these things balance. You need to raise taxes to put money into the NHS to be able to afford a welfare system that's sustainable. And yet you can't increase taxes too much because it will destroy the wealth creation that's necessary. And I've tried to get the balance right, bringing in the tax that is needed to fund our vital public services without borrowing more and more and more. Because we are now paying £105 billion a year in debt interest payments because the Conservatives doubled the national debt. I want to bring those payments down because I would rather spend that money on our schools, our hospitals, and indeed on our defence, which is obviously so crucial in the world that we now face. So it is a tough balancing act to get that right, not to tax too much, but tax enough to be able to afford the public services that we want and deserve, but also ensure that we have that stability, that we don't borrow too much, that we do what Liz Truss did 2.5 years ago, which is crash the economy with unfunded commitments. And that's the tightrope, I guess, that I'm trying to walk as Chancellor. And also, and this is really crucial, when we do tax, getting value for money for every pound of taxpayers' money that we spend, treating taxpayers' money with the respect that we treat our own money, which is why we are trying to drive out waste, a 15% productivity target to reduce the admin costs of doing government, because I want people to know when they pay their taxes, it'll be used in a way that they want.
When you came into power, you promised to claw back a lot of the COVID money that was wasted in the last government. I think £674 billion. £1 billion, that sounds a hell of a lot.
It's an awful lot of money.
A huge amount. Anyway, how much of that have you clawed back so far? Because you did say it would be a real priority. I know you appointed a COVID commissioner who's been in the job, 3 or 4 months now?
So Tom Hayhoe is doing that role. And actually, we will have more to say about that in the next few weeks. He's doing really good work, including with different fraud agencies, to make sure that we're doing everything with our power to get that money back. I said in the House of Commons today, that money belongs in our public services. It never should have gone to the friends and the donors of the Conservative
Party.
But
how much have you clawed back already?
Look, we're going to say more about that we're going to say more about that in the next few weeks. Tom Hayhoe has only recently been appointed, but he's doing a great job.
Curveball question coming up. How much pocket money do you pay your kids?
I
have a reason for asking this.
Well, I don't know, they might phone in. I've got 2 and they're different ages, so we pay one more than the other.
Well, the reason
they both get paid, but they both get pocket money of between £5 and £10 a week.
Well, you're not as generous as your chief secretary, and the chief secretaries aren't supposed to be generous.
Goodness me.
He today, Darren Jones, on Politics Live, likened the cut in PIP payments, on average £4,500, likened it to him cutting his kids' pocket money by £10 a week. I was quite astonished that he'd pay his kids £10 a week, but I mean, how crass is that? Liken the two things.
Well, I think one thing that I would say is that my children and the Chief Secretary's children are too young. But if you have a 16-year-old and you say, do you know what? I'm not going to give you so much pocket money. I want you to go out to work. And then the OBR comes and does an impact assessment and says, your child is going to be worse off. Well, they're going to be worse off if they don't go and get themselves a Saturday job. But if they do go and get themselves a Saturday job, they'll probably be better off and they probably might enjoy it as well. Now, I know that's not the right analogy, but there are a lot of people who have a disability but who are desperate to work. And with the appropriate support and with an employer that is sympathetic and can find work that's appropriate, I know that there are many, many more disabled people who can work, who want to work. And if they go to work, they'll be earning more money for them and their families, but also contributing to the national economy too.
I can sense being told to wind up. So I've got one final question. Has this job been more difficult than you thought it would be?
This job is the privilege of my life. It is the job, Ian, and you've known me actually since before I became an MP,
absolutely.
so more than 15 years now. And probably the first time you met me, you could sense what I wanted to achieve in politics, and that was to be Chancellor of the Exchequer. And so to be in this office, in this chair today, it is the privilege of my life. It's not an easy job.
Is it a lonely job?
I think politics can be a lonely job. There's only one Chancellor of the Exchequer, but I'm in a great team, get huge support from the Prime Minister and indeed from my other Cabinet colleagues and the Treasury team, both the civil servants, but also my ministerial team. So every day I wake up being really proud of doing this job and having the chance to do it.
So you don't do what the previous occupant of this office did and listen to the Arctic Monkeys when you wake up?
I'm not sure if that would cheer me up. I think you know that I'm a bit. We've discussed this before. I'm more of a Beyonce fan.
Okay, Rachel Reeves, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Ian.
So there we go, the Rachel Reeves, Chancellor of the Exchequer there, speaking to me about an hour and a half ago. Keen to get your views on what she said, her defence of the welfare cuts, the welfare reforms. I imagine quite a few of you are going to be a bit upset about that, and also the fact that universal credit is not going to be uprated with inflation. That was announced today.